The dust clouds rose high above the Arizona Territory as Samuel Henderson guided his weathered wagon across the unforgiving landscape. His calloused hands gripped the reins tight, but not as tight as his heart squeezed with worry for the two small faces peering out from beneath the canvas cover behind him. 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Tommy had been without their mother for nearly a year now, taken by the fever that swept through their settlement like wildfire. Samuel had tried his best to fill both roles, but the loneliness in his children's eyes cut deeper than any wound he'd ever known. The year was 1887, and the frontier was still a dangerous place for a widower raising 2 young ones alone. Samuel worked cattle for the larger ranchers, moving from job to job, trying to make enough money to give his children a stable home. But stability seemed as elusive as morning mist in the desert heat. The children needed more than he could give them. They needed gentle hands to braid Emma's wild hair, soft words to chase away Tommy's nightmares, and the kind of warmth that only a mother's love could provide. As they traveled toward the small town of Cedar Ridge, where Samuel hoped to find work with the Patterson Ranch, fate was already weaving its mysterious threads. Unknown to the Henderson family, just 15 miles ahead, a young Apache woman named Ayana was facing her own desperate situation. Her tribal band had been forced onto a reservation, but she had escaped during a brutal raid by soldiers who showed no mercy to women or children. Now she wandered the harsh landscape, wounded and alone, carrying nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart full of grief for the family she'd lost. Ayana's story began in the Chiricahua Mountains, where she had lived peacefully with her people for 23 years. She was known among her tribe as a skilled healer and caretaker of children. Her own husband and infant daughter had died from diseases brought by the white settlers, leaving her with an empty cradle and arms that ached to hold a child again. When the soldiers came to force her people onto the San Carlos reservation, she had seen the writing on the wall: death, despair, and the slow destruction of everything she held sacred. The escape had been harrowing. Under cover of darkness, she had slipped away from the reservation, heading toward the mountains where she hoped to find remnants of free Apache bands. But the journey proved more treacherous than expected. A rattlesnake bite on her leg had slowed her progress, and the infection was spreading. She had been walking for 3 days now, using plants and herbs she found along the way to treat the wound, but her strength was failing fast. Meanwhile, Samuel's wagon hit a deep rut in the road, jolting the children awake from their afternoon nap. Emma rubbed her eyes and looked out at the endless expanse of sagebrush and red rock. "Papa, when will we get there?" she asked, her voice small and tired. Samuel's heart ached at the weariness he heard. These children had been through too much, seen too many temporary homes, slept under too many strange roofs. "Soon, little bird," he replied, using the pet name his late wife, Mary, had given their daughter. "The Patterson Ranch is just ahead. We'll have a real home there, with proper beds and maybe even a garden where you can help grow vegetables." Tommy peeked his head out from under his makeshift blanket. "Will there be other children to play with, Papa?" The longing in his voice was unmistakable. The boy had been so quiet lately, so serious for someone who should be laughing and running and getting into mischief. "I hope so, son. I surely do hope so," Samuel answered, though he wasn't certain of anything anymore except his determination to provide for his children. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Samuel spotted something unusual ahead. At first he thought it might be a wounded animal, but as he drew closer, his heart nearly stopped. There, collapsed beside a cluster of rocks, was a young Indian woman. Her dark hair was matted with sweat and dirt, and her buckskin dress was torn and stained with blood. Samuel's first instinct was caution. Relations between settlers and Apache had been tense for years, filled with misunderstandings and violence on both sides. But as he looked at the woman's still form, he saw not a threat, but a human being in desperate need of help. He had been raised by a mother who believed in Christian charity, who taught him that helping others was not just a duty, but a privilege. He stopped the wagon and climbed down, telling the children to stay put. As he approached the woman, she stirred slightly, her dark eyes fluttering open. Fear flashed across her face as she saw him approaching, and she tried to push herself up, speaking rapidly in Apache while reaching for a small knife at her belt. "Easy there, miss," Samuel said softly, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not here to hurt you. You're injured, and I want to help." Ayana understood more English than she let on. She had learned it from a kind missionary who had lived among her people for several years before the troubles began. But trust did not come easily. especially not for a white man who could easily turn her over to the authorities, or worse. Still, the infection in her leg was spreading, and she could feel the fever beginning to cloud her thoughts. She had little choice but to take this chance. Samuel could see the snake bite clearly now. The puncture marks were surrounded by angry red swelling, and dark lines were beginning to creep up her leg. He had seen enough ranch hands suffer similar bites to know that without proper treatment she would likely die within days. He thought of his own children, watching from the wagon, and made a decision that would change all their lives forever. "My name is Samuel," he said gently, pointing to himself. "Samuel Henderson. Those are my children, Emma and Tommy." He gestured toward the wagon where two curious faces peered out. "We have medicine and clean water. Will you let me help you?" Ayana studied his face, searching for signs of deception or cruelty. What she saw instead was genuine concern and kindness, qualities that had become rare in her interactions with white settlers. Her grandmother had always told her that a person's true nature could be seen in their eyes, and this man's eyes held no malice, only compassion. She nodded slowly and spoke her first English words to him. "I am Ayana." It means eternal blossom. Her voice was weak but clear, and Samuel was surprised by how well she spoke his language. As Samuel carefully helped Ayana to the wagon, Emma and Tommy watched with wide eyes. They had never seen an Indian woman up close before, and their father's obvious concern for her well-being spoke volumes about the kind of man he was raising them to be. Emma, with the intuitive wisdom that often comes to children who have faced loss, seemed to understand immediately that this woman was in trouble and needed their help. "Is she going to be okay, Papa?" Emma whispered as Samuel gently lifted Ayana into the back of the wagon, arranging blankets to make her as comfortable as possible. "I don't know, sweetheart, but we're going to do everything we can to help her," Samuel replied. He cleaned the wound as best he could with the supplies he had, applied a poultice made from plants Ayana pointed out to him, and wrapped her leg in clean cloth. As they resumed their journey towards Cedar Ridge, an unlikely bond began to form in that wagon. Ayana, despite her pain and fever, found herself drawn to the two children who kept stealing glances at her with curiosity rather than fear. Emma offered her water from their precious supply, and Tommy shyly shared his favorite carved wooden horse, pressing it into her hands with a sweet smile. For the first time in months, Ayana felt something other than grief and desperation. These children, so obviously in need of a mother's care, stirred something deep within her wounded heart. Their clothes were clean but mended many times over, their hair neat but lacking a woman's gentle touch. She could see how hard their father was trying, but she could also see what was missing from their lives. Samuel, meanwhile, found himself amazed by the woman's quiet strength and dignity. Even in her weakened state, she remained alert and aware, her eyes constantly moving to check on the children's comfort and safety. When Tommy began to fuss as evening approached, she hummed a soft Apache lullaby that seemed to calm not only the boy, but the entire tension-filled wagon. As night fell and they made camp under a canopy of brilliant stars, none of them could have imagined that this chance encounter would grow into something beautiful and transformative. They were four wounded souls, brought together by circumstance and compassion, about to discover that sometimes the family we need isn't the one we're born into, but the one we choose to build together. The campfire crackled softly as Samuel kept watch, alternately checking on Ayana's condition and ensuring his children were warm and safe. In the flickering light, he couldn't help but notice how Ayana's presence seemed to bring a peace to his children that he hadn't seen since their mother's death. Emma slept more soundly than she had in weeks, and Tommy's usual restless movements had stilled completely. Perhaps this meeting was more than mere chance. Perhaps in the vast and often cruel frontier, kindness still had the power to create miracles. The morning sun brought both hope and uncertainty to their small camp. Ayana's fever had broken during the night, and the swelling in her leg had begun to subside thanks to the natural remedies she had guided Samuel to prepare. As she sat up slowly, accepting a cup of coffee that Samuel offered, she found herself studying the family that had saved her life. The children were already awake, watching her with the frank curiosity that only children possess. "How do you feel?" Samuel asked, his genuine concern evident in his voice. He had spent much of the night worried that she might take a turn for the worse, and he was relieved to see color returning to her cheeks. "Better," Ayana replied simply. "You saved my life. In my culture, this creates a bond that cannot be easily broken." She paused, looking at Emma, who was braiding grass into small dolls, her movements clumsy without proper guidance. "These children, they have no mother?" Samuel's face clouded over with the familiar pain that always came when he thought of Mary. "Their mother died last year. Fever took her, same as it took half our town." He looked at his children with such love and worry that Ayana felt her heart squeeze tight. "I've been trying to be enough for them, but a man cannot be both father and mother," Ayana said softly. "Just as a woman cannot be both mother and father. It is the way of things." She watched as Tommy tried to tie his bootlaces, his small fingers fumbling with the complex knots. Without thinking, she reached out and gently showed him an easier way, her hands guiding his until he succeeded. The joy on Tommy's face when he managed the knot was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "I did it. Papa, I did it!" he exclaimed, running to show his father. But his eyes kept drifting back to Ayana, as if afraid she might disappear like a dream. Emma approached more cautiously, carrying her sad collection of broken toys and faded clothes. "Are you really an Apache?" she asked, settling cross-legged on the ground near Ayana. "Papa told us stories about Apache women who were brave and could heal people with plants." Ayana smiled, the first real smile she had felt in months. "I am Apache, yes, and I do know the healing plants, though I learned from my grandmother, who learned from hers. Would you like to learn some small things?" Emma's eyes lit up like stars. For the next hour, as Samuel packed their camp, Ayana showed Emma how to identify useful plants, how to braid hair properly so it would stay neat all day, and how to make a small pouch from scraps of leather. Tommy watched too, fascinated by this woman who seemed to know secrets about the world around them. As they resumed their journey towards Cedar Ridge, the atmosphere in the wagon had changed completely. Where there had been polite caution the day before, now there was tentative friendship. Ayana found herself naturally falling into the role of caretaker, adjusting Emma's hat to protect her from the sun, making sure Tommy had enough water, and quietly observing all the small ways these children were trying to grow up too fast without a mother's guidance. Samuel, meanwhile, was amazed by the transformation in his children. Emma chatted animatedly about the plants they passed, using the Apache names Ayana had taught her. Tommy sat closer to the Apache woman than he had to any adult since his mother's death, occasionally reaching out to touch her hand, as if to reassure himself she was real. "Miss Ayana," Emma said as they traveled, "do you have children?" The question hit Ayana like a physical blow, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Samuel saw her face change and gently told Emma not to ask personal questions, but Ayana shook her head. "It is all right," she said quietly. "I had a daughter once. She was very small, smaller than Tommy. She and my husband died from the white man's sickness 2 winters ago." The pain in her voice was raw and honest. "Since then, my arms have been empty, and my heart has been cold." Emma, with the startling wisdom that grief sometimes brings to children, reached over and took Ayana's hand. "My mama died too," she said simply. "It makes everything hurt, doesn't it?" Ayana squeezed the little girl's hand, and something shifted inside her chest. These children understood loss in a way most adults never would. They weren't just missing a mother. They were fellow travelers in the land of grief, trying to find their way back to happiness. When they finally reached Cedar Ridge, the small frontier town buzzed with activity. Cowboys drove cattle through the dusty streets. Women in bonnets hurried between shops, and children played in the spaces between buildings. Samuel guided the wagon toward the Patterson Ranch, which sat on a small rise outside town, but he felt his stomach tighten with worry. How would people react to Ayana's presence? Would they accept her? Or would her Apache heritage create problems for all of them? Jeremiah Patterson was a weathered man in his 50s who had built his ranch from nothing through hard work and fair dealing. He came out to greet Samuel's wagon, his eyes immediately noting the extra passenger. But Patterson was a practical man who judged people by their character rather than their background, and he could see that Samuel was a good man in need of work. "You must be Henderson," Patterson said, shaking Samuel's hand firmly. "I got your letter about needing work. Fine references from the cattle drivers." His eyes moved to Ayana, taking in her appearance and the obvious care she was showing to the children. "And this is your family?" Samuel hesitated, unsure how to explain their unusual situation, but Ayana spoke up clearly. "These children needed help. I needed help. Sometimes help comes in unexpected ways." Patterson studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Apache, aren't you? I've had dealings with your people before. always found them to be honest and hard-working when treated with respect. He turned back to Samuel. There's a small cabin at the edge of the property. 3 rooms need some fixing up, but it's solid. Job comes with use of the cabin. $20 a month and provisions. Will that suit? Samuel felt relief wash over him like cool water. Yes, sir, that suits just fine. As they made their way to the cabin, Ayana felt a strange mixture of hope and fear building in her chest. The little house was simple but clean, with a main room, a small bedroom, and a tiny kitchen. Samuel immediately began planning how to arrange sleeping spaces, assuming Ayana would want privacy, but she surprised him. The children should not sleep alone, she said firmly. Emma can share the bedroom with me if she wishes. Tommy can sleep near his father, but close enough to call out if he has bad dreams. Emma clapped her hands together in delight. Really? You would want to share with me? I would be honored, Ayana replied, and she meant it. The thought of sleeping in the same room as this brave little girl who reminded her so much of the daughter she'd lost brought both pain and healing. Over the next few days, something remarkable happened. Without any formal discussion or arrangement, the 4 of them began to function as a family. Samuel worked cattle during the day, but he came home to find his children clean, fed, and happier than he'd seen them in months. Ayana had somehow acquired fabric and thread and was teaching Emma to sew properly. She had shown Tommy how to whittle and make his own toys. Most importantly, she had brought back their laughter. The children, meanwhile, embraced Ayana with the wholehearted acceptance that children give to those who truly care for them. They stopped asking when she might leave and began assuming she would stay. Emma started calling her Ayana Mama when she forgot to be formal, and Tommy took to holding her hand wherever they walked. But not everyone in Cedar Ridge was as accepting as Jeremiah Patterson. Some of the townspeople whispered about the Indian woman living with the Henderson family. A few of the ranch wives made pointed comments about proper Christian households and the influence Ayana might have on the children. Samuel heard the whispers and felt his protective instincts rise. One afternoon, when he came home to find Emma practicing Apache words while Ayana taught her to make corn cakes, he realized that he didn't care what anyone else thought. His children were thriving. They were learning, growing, and healing in ways he had never been able to help them achieve alone. That evening, as they sat around their small table sharing dinner, Tommy asked the question that was on everyone's mind. Ayana, are you going to stay with us forever? The silence that followed was thick with hope and fear. Ayana looked around the table at these 3 people who had become so precious to her in such a short time. Samuel's steady blue eyes held no pressure, only patience. Emma's face was full of barely contained hope. Tommy's small hand crept across the table to touch hers. I do not know what forever means, Ayana said carefully. But I know that you are my family now, if you will have me. Not because I need rescue, but because we rescue each other. Samuel felt his throat tighten with emotion. Ayana, you've given my children something I never could. You've given them back their childhood, their joy. If you're willing to stay, there's nothing I'd want more. But even as they celebrated this new understanding, clouds were gathering on the horizon. Word had reached the military that an Apache woman had been seen in the area, and a patrol was being organized to investigate. Moreover, some of the more prejudiced townspeople were beginning to organize themselves, talking about the danger of having savages so close to their families. Ayana sensed the coming storm, even before Samuel heard the rumors. Her people had developed instincts for danger over generations of persecution, and those instincts were telling her that their peaceful existence was about to be tested. But as she looked at Emma and Tommy, now sleeping peacefully in beds with clean sheets and full bellies, she knew she would face whatever came to protect this family that had become her heart. The choice was no longer between staying and leaving. The choice was between fighting for love and surrendering to fear. And Ayana had not survived everything she had survived to give up now, when she finally had something worth protecting. The trouble came on a Tuesday morning in early October, when the autumn air carried the first hints of winter's approach. Samuel had left early to help move cattle to winter pasture, and Ayana was teaching Emma how to preserve vegetables for the cold months ahead when she heard the thunder of hooves approaching their cabin. Through the window, she saw 6 cavalry soldiers riding hard toward their home, dust clouds marking their urgent approach. Emma looked up from the carrots she was cutting, sensing the sudden tension in Ayana's posture. "What is it?" she asked. But Ayana was already moving, her survival instincts taking over. "Take Tommy and go to the root cellar," Ayana said quietly but firmly. Stay there until your father comes home, no matter what you hear. Promise me this." Emma's eyes went wide with fear, but she had learned to trust Ayana completely over the past months. She grabbed Tommy's hand and pulled him toward the small cellar behind the cabin, both children disappearing just as the soldiers reached their front door. The lieutenant who knocked was a young man named Bradford, eager to make his mark and convinced that all Apache were dangerous savages who needed to be controlled. He had been told there was a renegade Apache woman in the area, and he intended to bring her back to the reservation, or worse. Ayana opened the door with calm dignity, though her heart was racing. She had dressed carefully in a simple blue dress that Samuel had bought for her in town, her long hair braided neatly and adorned with a small ribbon Emma had given her. She looked like what she was, a woman caring for a home and family, but Bradford saw only what his prejudices allowed him to see. "You're the Apache woman," he stated rather than asked. "I'm Lieutenant Bradford, United States Cavalry. You're in violation of federal law by being off the reservation. You need to come with us." "I have committed no crime," Ayana replied calmly in perfect English. "I live here with my family." "This is my home!" Bradford's eyes hardened. "Your family?
You mean the white man who's harboring a fugitive?
Where are the children?" "We've heard there are white children living with you." At that moment, Jeremiah Patterson came riding up with 3 of his men, having heard about the military patrol from one of his hands who had seen them in town. Patterson was not a man to let injustice happen on his property without a fight. "What's the meaning of this, Lieutenant?" Patterson demanded, dismounting and striding over to the group. "Miss Ayana is under my protection as an employee of this ranch." "Employee?" Bradford laughed harshly. "This woman is Apache. She belongs on a reservation, not living among decent white folks and corrupting white children." "Corrupting?" Patterson's voice was dangerously quiet. "Son, this woman has done more good for this family than you've probably done in your entire military career." The Henderson children were lost and grieving when she came to them. Now they're healthy, happy, and learning valuable skills. "If that's corruption, we need more of it." The standoff might have escalated into violence, but at that moment, Samuel came racing back from the pastures on his horse, having been alerted by one of the other cowboys. He leaped from his mount and positioned himself protectively near Ayana. "Gentlemen, what seems to be the problem?" Samuel asked, though his tone made it clear he already understood the situation perfectly. "Mr. Henderson, I presume?" Bradford said. "You're harboring a fugitive Apache. This woman needs to return to the reservation immediately." Samuel looked at Ayana, then at the soldiers, then back at the lieutenant. In that moment, he made a choice that would define the rest of his life. "This woman is not a fugitive, Lieutenant. She's my wife." The words hung in the air like thunder. Ayana's eyes widened in surprise, but she quickly understood what Samuel was doing. In the legal system of the time, a married Apache woman had different status than a single one, especially if she was married to a white man and living peacefully. "Your wife?" Bradford sputtered. "When did this marriage take place?" 3 weeks ago, Samuel said smoothly, "in a ceremony performed by Jeremiah Patterson, who's authorized to perform marriages as a justice of the peace." He looked at Patterson, who caught on immediately. "That's right," Patterson confirmed. "Perfectly legal ceremony. I have the papers in my office if you'd like to see them." Bradford looked frustrated. The law regarding married Apache women was murky, especially when they were living peacefully and not causing trouble. Even so, there have been complaints from townspeople about having an Apache so close to town. "Then I suggest those townspeople mind their own business," came a new voice. Dr. Margaret Walsh, the town's only doctor and one of its most respected citizens, had arrived with her medical bag. She was a woman in her 40s who had earned the respect of the entire community through her skill and dedication. "Walsh," Bradford said, clearly not expecting this development. "Lieutenant," she replied crisply, "I've come to check on Mrs. Henderson and the children. I understand there's been some unpleasantness." The use of Mrs. Henderson was not accidental. Walsh had been treating the Henderson family since they arrived, and she had seen firsthand the positive changes in the children since Ayana joined their household. She was not about to let prejudice destroy what was clearly a loving family. "Doctor, surely you can't approve of white children being raised by an Apache," Bradford protested. Walsh's eyes flashed with anger. "Young man, I approve of children being raised with love, care, and proper attention to their health and education. Those children have thrived under Ayana's care in ways that would make any mother proud. Now, Unless you have specific criminal charges to bring, I suggest you leave this family in peace." At that moment, Emma came running from the root cellar, unable to stay hidden when she heard familiar voices. She ran straight to Ayana and threw her arms around her waist. "Mama Ayana, are the bad men going to take you away?" The word mama, spoken with such natural affection by the blonde-haired, blue-eyed little girl, had a profound effect on everyone present. Even some of Bradford's soldiers looked uncomfortable with the situation. Tommy followed his sister, and soon both children were clinging to Ayana, their fear and love obvious to everyone watching. Samuel moved to put his arms around all three of them, creating a picture of family unity that was impossible to deny. Dr. Walsh seized the moment. "Lieutenant Bradford, what you see here is a family. A man who lost his wife, children who lost their mother, and a woman who lost her own family, all finding healing together. If that's against any law, then the law is wrong." Bradford found himself in an impossible situation. The woman was clearly not a threat, the children were obviously well cared for, and several of the town's most influential citizens were supporting the family. Moreover, the legal claim of marriage, whether real or fabricated, complicated his authority to act. "This isn't over," he said finally, but his words lacked conviction. "We'll be monitoring the situation." "You do that," Patterson said, "and while you're at it, monitor how happy and healthy those children are. Monitor how well they're learning to read and write and work with their hands. Monitor how this family contributes to our community instead of taking from it." As the soldiers rode away, the small group stood together in the yard, breathing heavily from the tension. Emma looked up at Ayana with worried eyes. "Are you really married to Papa now?" Samuel and Ayana looked at each other, both realizing that the lie they had told to protect their family had created a new reality that they needed to address. The truth was, over the past months, they had grown to care for each other deeply. Not the passionate love of young romance, but something deeper and more enduring. Respect, partnership, and genuine affection built on shared trials and mutual support. "Would you like us to be married?" Ayana asked gently, directing the question to both children. "Yes," Emma said immediately. "Then you'd really be our mama forever." Tommy nodded vigorously. "And no one could make you go away." Samuel took Ayana's hand, his eyes serious but warm. "I know this isn't how most marriages begin, but I can't imagine a better woman to share my life and raise my children. If you're willing, I'd like to make our lie into the truth." Ayana felt tears welling in her eyes. She had found something she never expected to find again, not just love but belonging. "I am willing," she said softly. "You have already given me everything I thought I had lost forever." 3 months later, they held a real wedding ceremony in the little church in Cedar Ridge. Walsh stood as matron of honor. Patterson gave Ayana away, and the entire congregation included not only the ranch families who had come to love and respect Ayana, but also several Apache people who had heard about the wedding and came to witness this bridge between two worlds. Emma wore a new dress that Ayana had sewn for her, complete with intricate beadwork that incorporated both Apache and American designs. Tommy served as ring bearer, proudly carrying the simple gold bands that Samuel had ordered from the catalog. But the most beautiful sight was Ayana herself, wearing a white dress adorned with traditional Apache wedding symbols, alongside Christian ones, representing the blending of cultures that had created their unique family. The prejudice didn't disappear overnight. There were still whispers and occasionally hostile looks from some townspeople, but the Henderson family had something stronger than prejudice working for them. They had love, respect, and the support of good people who judged them by their character rather than their appearances. Over the years that followed, their home became a place of welcome for anyone in need. Ayana used her healing knowledge to help treat injuries and illnesses throughout the community, earning the gratitude and respect of even some of her former critics. Samuel became foreman of the Patterson Ranch, his dedication and honesty making him indispensable. Emma grew into a confident young woman who spoke both English and Apache fluently, and served as a translator and cultural bridge when Apache people came to trade in town. Tommy became known for his skill with horses and his easy way with people of all backgrounds, but perhaps most importantly, they became a testament to the possibility of love transcending cultural boundaries. In a time and place where such unions were rare and often discouraged, the Henderson family proved that understanding, respect, and genuine care could overcome the barriers that fear and ignorance tried to build. Years later, when Emma was preparing to marry a young rancher from a neighboring town, and Tommy was getting ready to start his own homestead, they would tell their own children about the day their Apache mother came into their lives. They would speak of how love can come in unexpected forms, how families can be built from the most unlikely circumstances, and how sometimes the people who rescue us are the ones we end up rescuing in return. Ayana never forgot her Apache heritage, and she made sure her adopted children understood and respected the culture that had shaped her. But she also embraced her new life with wholehearted commitment, proving that it was possible to honor the past while building a beautiful future. In the end, the story of Samuel, Ayana, Emma, and Tommy Henderson became a legend in Cedar Ridge, not because it was impossible, but because it showed what was possible when people chose love over fear, understanding over prejudice, and hope over despair. They needed each other, and in finding each other, they discovered that the best families are not always born, but sometimes built by choice, one act of kindness at a time.